Okay, welcome back. We are going on, this will be part seven of Challenges of Modern Secularism, where we're continuing to look at the influence of modernity on secular humanism, and which is continuing to create this split between the biblical worldview and secular humanist worldview. And we're going to be exploring more and more about what secular humanist worldview is about and how, of course, it's different from a biblical perspective. And we've been looking at some of the factors that have gone into creating this split from the time of the Enlightenment. And so we're going to continue on that same discussion in this one. Let me share the screen with you. We left off on this one last time, seeing how the Christian perspective is being left out of the public sphere more in education, science, and things like that. Not necessarily always not allowed, but looked down on at times, or just pushed out of consideration when dealing with various things. So now let's move forward here, and there was a book written by a man named Hunter, and he identified three primary carriers of modernity, and I thought these are useful from him. The first is the industrial capitalism with its applied rationality and rational controls. I don't think I would limit it to industrial capitalism, although it certainly does that. Communism and socialism do it, and even more so, because there is a lot more applied rationality and rational control based on the very fact that, at least in communism case, any kind of atheism is professed as the absolute part of it. So I would not limit it to industrial capitalism. The second carrier of modernity is the modern state as the primary purveyor of a rationalistic or bureaucratic form of socialization, which compartmentalizes rather than the integration of knowledge. And there's a lot of truth in that, in the sense that it's very rationalistic. You say, well, you learn this aspect here, and you compartmentalize knowledge. And that's what's happening, of course, in modernity. And they compartmentalize, say, well, the real knowledge is over here on science only, and other forms of knowledge, we can't really consider them as really as important as science, or that they really can give us the truth like science can. And so you have this compartmentalization, and the modern state, has influence in that. We've seen where our government, is taking religion out of the public sphere. It's compartmentalizing. The third is the knowledge sector, which is with its institutions of culture formation, reality definition, and so prominent within this latter group, of course, are the universities. He includes mass media and arts. What I would do is I would give that as a fourth category. I would have put a fourth category of popular media and press in that category. But in either case, it's a knowledge sector, and I think this is where our research organizations and universities, they are the ones that push a certain direction in our culture on how we understand the world, and of course the idea of evolution and secular idea of that there's only a physical realm, not a spiritual realm, are prominent in these areas. And so these are areas that carry modernity, and with that, the ideas that come with secular humanism. Some time back, I was studying in my PhD program, and this is some of the areas I had to study. And I wrote this comment: modernization and modernity challenge Christianity as it interprets God's timeless message in the midst of cultural and sociological changes. whether the progression of the modernity constitutes what Max Weber calls the iron cage, or Peter Berger imagines as a gigantic steel hammer. There's little doubt that the Christian message has lived within, confronted, moderated, wrestled with, and even compromised with cultural and social issues as historical situations, societies have changed with the onward march of modernity, or forms of modernity, various modernities, in other words. The point I was making on this is that Christianity, even from its foundation, it entered in a very pluralistic world in the first century. And though there wasn't really secular humanism as we know it today, a few philosophical thinkers, downplayed gods and goddesses, but didn't throw them out entirely. But as things have progressed into the modern age, we do see a lot of pressure being put on to conform to understanding reality only from a physical worldview, or from a closed worldview that only the physical world exists. And Max Weber uses the metaphor of an iron cage, where you're stuck in this iron cage, and the modern world's around you, and it's just keeping you in there and pressing you to stay within the bounds of that iron cage. Peter Berger, on the other hand, used a gigantic steel hammer. It's sort of like the old blacksmith, and he sticks the iron in the fire, gets it red hot, and then hammers it with a big old hammer to form it and make it conform to what he wants. And so, yeah, the pressures of modernity are pushing people more and more to think of the world simply as this physical existence. But Christians have wrestled with different worldviews throughout history from the very beginning. When the Roman Empire was there, they were countercultural and went against the norm of the time, and they were persecuted for hundreds of years because of it. But that's been the case for Christianity. If we're not being cross-cultural generally, or countercultural, we need to take a look. If are we conforming too much to the culture? And so, as we look at these influences, we need to keep in mind that from a biblical worldview, a Christian worldview, that we're saying that there are going to be things in our culture all the time that will be against a biblical worldview. And part of modernization, modernity, with its emphasis on a more of a closed worldview, is something we have to consider and think about, and that's what part of the discourse is about, particularly this section on secular humanism. So, some sociocultural influences of modernity, and you probably could think of others, but mainly these four, I think, are the big, and they're represented here within this. And you've got the kind of the crossroads since the Enlightenment into the modern era. You're at a crossroads where now people are making decisions, saying, well, am I going to follow a biblical worldview or secular worldview, or some kind of open worldview versus a closed worldview? So, dependence on science and reason from a closed worldview perspective, science and reason right here. Now, I notice I put from a closed worldview because I believe you can, and we do it. People with a open worldview practice science, and we reason. There's this idea that to be religious is to cast out reason, and of course, to be religious, you really have to have reason. And of course, the Bible says that we are created as reasoning beings, uh, and it even to make a profession of faith, to commitment to God, you don't do it without reason. You look at, why would you want to do these things? And you say, well, it makes sense to make a commitment. And it doesn't throw out reason at all. And scientists who have an open worldview, they can do science and go through the scientific process as well. In fact, the scientific process came out of the Christian perspective, saying that the world was created by an intelligent designer, therefore it's understandable, therefore we can study it. And the early scientists were mostly religious. So you have that aspect of it. Wealth accumulation and self-sufficient or self-centered perspective. This is that autonomous individual, but sometimes we can be so centered on, creating wealth, and this is your wealth accumulation down here, that it becomes a goal in and of itself to just gather more wealth, whether you need it all or not. And but if that using taking in wealth and accumulating wealth, it doesn't have anywhere to apply it in a good way, then you run into all kinds of use of wealth in bad ways and selfish ways instead of helping humanity. You also have the knowledge sector with its pursuit of truth, but it's also oftentimes now from a closed worldview and focuses on the autonomous human perspective. And so, you want truth, but we've already made up our minds that it's a closed worldview. There is no spiritual dimension, so you've already presupposed an understanding of the world. So the knowledge sector pursues truth, but only through that narrow perspective of a closed worldview. And for centuries, people studied the world through open worldview, and they were able to discover all kinds of things and pursue truth that way just as well. This limitation to a scientific, or what we'll call later scientism, idea that there is only a closed world view is putting a limitation right off the bat from finding out truth. Well, and then the last one, popular media and technological influences. These are purveyors of secularism. And we don't have to look far into popular media to realize that, that it pushes agendas out there. And one of those agendas is a secular humanist perspective of the world. Oftentimes you see in movies and TV shows that anybody that's Christian or conservative type Christian, they look kind of weird, they act weird, they're made fun of, and sometimes they're even serial killers. Not that that couldn't happen, and I'm sure it could, but it's those type of things that those kind of things can make push an agenda in and of themselves. There is modernity has influence on Christianity, and we have to be aware of that. It pushes the idea of being self-centered, and this autonomous person. And of course, the Bible teaches not to be that way. In fact, the two greatest commandments: love the Lord your God, with all your heart, soul, and mind. That's the outward focus to God. But the second one, greatest commandment, love your neighbor yourself, is focus on others. And yes, you shall love yourself as love others as you love yourself. Means you have to have self-love too, but it's not at the expense of humanity. And another area, the influence on Christianity is knowledge and education through science and reason is enough for ethical and moral decisions. In other words, you don't need a supreme being to have given you, what you need to make ethical and moral decisions. This is what we call rationalism, the philosophical stance according to which reason is the ultimate source of human knowledge. And of course, God made us as reasoning beings, but He also did give us moral direction as well. And the founding fathers knew that, and they said it's on the basis because those unalienable, if I say that right, rights were bestowed by God, not by the government. And and God bestows them to people, and people give the government the right. But um, but rationalism stands in opposition of things like empiricism, which points to senses as sufficient to justify knowledge. But they would say, well, no, you need to be scientific and use scientific process, because what you may see with your senses you might not see it accurately. But it also doesn't leave room for revelation, in the sense of saying God has revealed that this is a truth. And so these are some of modernity's influences that Christians have to think about and interact with, but also to discuss as why is this not true? And there are plenty of Christian writers out there who are doing this, and we will mention some things as we go along here. All right, so. Uh, Another influence on Christianity is materialism, and uh, which is a tendency to consider material possessions and physical comfort as more important than spiritual values. And uh, it's so easy to get caught up in the world and just to accumulate your wealth, to live for comfort now. And Bible even says God knows what we need. He knows we need a place to stay, we need food, water, and so forth. But there can be a tendency we will focus on just gathering material wealth for the sake of having it, and think that's going to make us happy. And of course, we don't have to look very far for people who are very wealthy who are not really happy, and that doesn't solve their issues. Friend of mine told me a story. One time he was out doing a gospel meeting, and he got invited over to a house from one of the people that was attending the gospel meeting. And he said they walked into this really huge mansion. And he said he didn't see anything as big and wonderful as this guy's house. And so he says he wasn't being very diplomatic, but he just said, "Well, wow, how much did this cost you?" And he wasn't not ready for the answer he got. The guy says, "Well, at first it cost me my marriage, and then the second he says it cost me my family, and then he said third it cost me my faith." And he had made a boatload of money in his life. But in doing so, he had missed the more valuable things of life. And now he knew about it. He had reclaimed his spiritual heritage, but he still had the process. Could he reclaim a marriage that was destroyed in the process, and family would wait to be seen. But again, that materialism and focus on just what we can gather now can be very uh, dangerous, and it tends, when we're only focusing on this physical realm instead of also on the spiritual realm, that's a big danger. And this is materialism is the doctrine that nothing exists but matter and its movement and modifications. And then religion is another aspect of modernity. Is religion is relegated to subconscious experience, needs and desires and feelings. We went over this in earlier lectures when we were talking about the source of religion, that humanity is notoriously religion. So people have to explain, how can that be if we're just a material world, if there's actually no spiritual realm, yet so many people are spiritual, are religious. And so this falls into the area of naturalism, the philosophical belief that everything arises from natural properties and causes. The supernatural or spiritual explanation are excluded or discounted. Um, so to exclude them, even though they know the vast majority of people have religious experience and believe in religion, they just say, well, it's just a subconscious experience. It's not based on any kind of reason, some kind of needs or neurotic need for a father figure with Freud or something like that. When in actuality, it's based on humans looking at the world around them and rationally coming to the conclusion that no, there is a supreme being, or there is something beyond just this world. But modernity pushes against that kind of acceptance of a supreme being. Peter Berger, who was one of the, is still alive last I checked, and he notes that modernization consists of transformation of the world brought about by technological innovations of the last few centuries, first in Europe, then with increasing rapidity all over the world. This transformation especially centers itself within political, social, economic patterns and structures that substantially influence beliefs, values, and culture. So he's looking at modernity and saying they do influence beliefs, values, and cultures. Now, remember, Peter Berger was one of the uh, sociologists that says believe in the secularization hypothesis that the U.S. would become more secular and be primarily secular, by the 1990s, and he had to go back and say no, he was wrong, and he you can look him up even on YouTube and find where he discusses the fact that no, we don't live in a secular society, we live in a pluralistic society, which is notoriously religion, but you do have secular humanism right beside other religions, but these transformations going on in modernization and modernity, do influence beliefs, values, and the cultures as a whole. And so in all of that, um, we see humanism sees modern abilities of humans to be able to provide answers to all of humanity's needs. And we see this particularly being put forward in the Humanist Manifesto II. And we want to just look at that uh, for a moment, and that's where we'll uh, end this video. We talked about Humanist Manifesto 1, which was signed by some leaders of that time period, 1930s, and saying, secular humanism is, the philosophy we adhere to. Well, the Humanist Manifesto 2 will be the one that really uh, outlines this more specifically. And we'll be looking at that here. Unless yes, I got that right. So, but we have to realize that secular humanism also impacts biblical criticism. And you have liberal scholarship that denies the inspiration of the Bible. They don't believe, like in miracles, that the miracles ever really happened. So that means, the incarnation of Jesus is from as God and come in the flesh isn't true. His death on the cross can be true, but the resurrection not true. Virgin birth not true. Those type of things. So even secular thinking affects theology if we let it. And you have some great commentaries out there by guys that are great theologians and historians, but they, if you look at what they believe, they would deny the inspiration of the Bible and these miracles and so forth. So that is out there as well. Modernization, belief in science is the only answer, is that major influence. And then how religion is viewed, like we've talked about, subjective versus psychological approach, or the evolutionary approach, were often mixed together to say, that religion is just something we make up in our subconscious and mind, and we give it outlet with religious actions. And then the secularism itself, which would say religious, if you have to be religious, it's a personal matter, keep it to yourself. Don't let it interfere with the public sphere where we want science and reason is going to take care of everything. So religion is pushed to the fringe, even in academics, academic research, and the academy oftentimes. Religion's just not seen as important. and because they feel like science provides answer, but historically, it's also been that God has provided us answers as well. And the spiritual aspect of humanity is downplayed or ignored. In other words, they look at humanity as simply as physical being without the spiritual dimension, like a soul uh, or a spirit. Um, so humanism sees modern abilities of humans as able to provide answers to all of humanity's needs, and that's what's going to feed into what becomes known as the Humanist Manifesto II. And so when you begin to read it, this was published in 1973. The first one, Humanist Manifesto I, was in 1930, I think, right in there. And this one goes into detail, and there'll be a Humanist Manifesto 3 we'll mention later, but it basically says, look at two, and here's some other things. So two is the centerpiece of secular humanism thinking. And so if you want to see their philosophy spelled out in a large degree, and there are other things, we'll see one later, a declaration of secular humanism that's written later. But this gives you an idea, and I'm just taking some excerpts from it so that we can see it in their own words, how secular humanists understand things, and the fact that this is what their agenda they push for people to follow along with their thinking, and it gives us an insight into the secular humanist worldview. So you have the promise of immortal salvation or fear of eternal damnation are both illusory and harmful. They detract humans from present concerns, from self-actualization, and from rectifying social injustices. There are so many things wrong with this statement, but notice, first of all, they throw out the idea that there's a immortal salvation or eternal damnation. They say it's an illusion. And besides being an illusion, the fact that it's being taught, which of course means Christianity, is harmful. It actually hurts people. And of course, because I hold a biblical worldview, I would totally disagree with this. But but they just flat out state there is no spiritual dimension in all of this, and it'll get clearer as we go along here. Um, and you know, but then they say because there were religious people are focusing on the hereafter, it detracts from them really concentrating on the present concerns. And they list self-actualization, which comes out of some psychological things, Abraham Maslow, and how to be a self-actualized person. That's the highest dimension that you can get to really know who you are as a person. And but if you study psychology, you will no doubt run into that theory. And I think some of it's got some good things in it, but otherwise, but when you put it in the context of just a physical thing without any uh, spiritual in it, it is leads you away from the idea that there is a spiritual dimension to humanity. And then notice they say, and from rectifying social injustices, they're like saying, well, because people have a biblical worldview and they focus on the afterlife, that that they're kept from doing something that takes away social injustice. Well, this is just totally wrong. You don't have to, you can read through the history of Christianity as it came into the Roman society, and it tried to rectify all kinds of wrongs, like the exposing of babies and, providing care for the sick, educating both males and females. You could go on. And throughout history, uh, Christianity has tried to rectify, working against slavery, try to rectify injustices. In fact, C.S. Lewis, in a quote, says outright, he says, if I can get this right, he's saying that those who, how does he say it? Those who look to the afterlife are the ones that are most concerned with the present life. I probably got that off a little bit, but that's the idea. He says the very fact that they're concerned with afterlife means that they are also very concerned, because that's what Jesus was concerned with. He was not only concerned with people understanding, coming to faith, but helping them in the current situation. And Christians have always internalized that overall. So they go on to say modern science discredits such historic concepts as a ghost in the machine or the separable soul. Well, these are some metaphors used in sociological writings, and by ghost in the machine, it's the world is this machine, and it's just a physical world that works off of natural laws, and that's all there is. And there is no ghost in the machine, meaning nothing spiritual about it. And or there's a separable soul. In other words, humans don't have a spiritual dimension to them. So they come right out and just say it. Rather, they say science affirms that the human species is an emergence from natural evolutionary forces. As far as we know, the total personality is a function of biological organism transecting in social and cultural contexts. So basically, they're just saying only the physical part of humanity is real. And it comes from an evolutionary process, so they buy into the whole evolutionary theory. And, the total personality doesn't have a spiritual dimension, it's just a biological organism impacted by its environment, basically. And so they say there's no credible evidence that life survives death of the body. Of course, how would you prove that scientifically through the scientific method and reason? We continue to exist in our progeny and in the way that our lives have influenced others in our culture. Well, you can be a Christian and believe in the afterlife and still hope that your influence affects your progeny, and and the way you lived your life had an influence on others in the culture. That's still possible. But this gives you an idea just right off the bat, their perspective. Now, you can go online and just Google Human Manifesto II, and it'll take you right to places where it's posted. Most of the time, it's posted in a Humanist Society's website, and you can read the whole thing. And we just don't have time to cover everything that's in it. So I'm pulling out the main points here. This leads to they have sections 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so forth. And so I'm pulling out of the fifth and sixth sections. The fifth says the preciousness and dignity of the individual person is a central humanist value. And as Christians, we would, I'm a Christian humanist in the sense of how that humanist is used, in the sense that I believe in the dignity and importance of humanity, and that they should, be valued, because that's what God says. He says, created everybody in my image, and they're all of equal value in God's sight. So as a Christian, I should hold to that. However, and the next part, even we would agree with, the individual should be encouraged to realize their own creative talents and desires. Uh, yeah, I think so. Now, you may have to define what you mean by desires, because humans have evil desires at times. And, we might not want somebody that, he desires, to kill people, and he works as a serial killer. But but within proper and good desires, we would agree with this. But notice then they say we reject all religious, ideological, or moral codes that denigrate the individual, suppress freedom, dull intellect, and dehumanize personality. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful there, but they just reject religious thinking, and they make that very clear because since there's only the physical dimension, you can't have religion anyway. It doesn't exist. It's not real anyway. Yeah, even if you think it might exist. And then ideological things that suppress freedom. So whatever, it's not religion, some other ideological thing, and they reject all moral codes that denigrate individuals. So moral codes are thrown out, and they would say that moral codes come from religious, particularly Christianity, denigrate the individual. They suppress their freedom and to practice their morality however they see fit, and and you will see that they will say that it's traditional Christian values that really suppress this kind of thing that shouldn't be suppressed. But it's also pointing out dull intellect, and they would oftentimes, it's not unusual for them to view religion as non-intellectual and dulling the intellect. So you should allow people to have their own personality, which as a Christian, I wouldn't. I think people should have their own personality, but sometimes people do things that would be contrary to my biblical worldview and to God, what God says in the Bible. So you have to keep those type of things in mind. We believe in the maximum individual autonomy consonant with social responsibility. So whatever the individual wants to do, so long as it's socially responsible. Well, who's going to define what's socially responsible and how's that defined is going to be a question. So that kind of gives you a perspective right off the bat there. But then when you get into the sixth, and this is where they take some of what they just said in the fifth and apply it to the idea of sexuality. And this is one of the areas that comes across pretty clearly. And they say, we believe that intolerant attitudes, often cultivated by Orthodox religion and puritanical cultures, unduly repress sexual conduct. So here they're putting into practice what they've just said, and basically said, we believe religion brings intolerant attitudes, and and breeds a puritanical culture, and so it unduly says there's certain sexual conduct that's it's not right, and they don't think that should be repressed. People should be able to practice their sexual conduct however they want, they would say, short of harming somebody. But other than that, it's pretty well open. And they, at this time in 1973, they list the right to birth control, abortion, and of course, at this time period would have been, big debate that would with Roe v. Wade, and they said divorce should be recognized. Now, back in '73, it was a little. Nowadays, we don't even notice because divorce is just you can get a divorce pretty much for anything in pretty much any state. But it was a little more difficult at time early on. You had to show that there was some thing that a spouse did wrong, like having an affair with somebody or something like that. So you got to take it within the time period too that it was being what they're centering on. But they know, you can do all these things short of harming others by compelling them to do likewise. Individuals should be permitted to express their sexual proclivities and pursue their lifestyles as they desire. And we can see that is being put into practice today in our society. But who decides what is harmful to other people? And we've passed laws like what's the age of consent for sexual activity? Generally 18. But you also have to decide what's harmful. Is it just physical harm, psychological harm, and what would constitute psychological harm? There's so many questions involved with all of this, but this gives the tenor of secular humanism, and having that view that only the physical world exists, that leaves wide open, anything that that a biblical overview would contest. They would just say, well, you just throw that out and don't worry about it. Just stick with the secular humanist perspective. And we're seeing here really the main characteristics that are recognizable in secular humanism. And we're going to carry on from there in the next video, but this one we'll call it quits on this, and pick up on a continual look at the sociocultural factors that influence secular humanism and how it's impacting our culture today. And so we'll carry that further in the next one. So until then, have a good day.